Hi, and welcome to another special episode. We're going to talk about the Howling trilogy of books by Gary Brandner. I read these on Kindle. First up, let's do the old school book report part. The first Howling novel is the most familiar story since it was loosely adapted into the original Howling film in 1981 and redone much more faithfully in The Howling 4, the original Nightmare in 1988. However, neither movie sticks perfectly to the novel. This is the story of Karen Beatty, a woman recovering from a traumatic sexual assault in Los Angeles. After the attack, Karen struggles with nightmares and anxiety. Her husband, Roy, suggests a retreat to the remote mountain village of Drago for recuperation. Upon arriving there, Karen and Roy find the town oddly quiet and unwelcoming. As they settle into their rented cabin, Karen notices strange occurrences and becomes increasingly uneasy. She hears eerie howling at night. The locals harbor dark secrets. Karen uncovers the terrifying truth about Drago. The village is a community of werewolves. These creatures can transform at will and live in secrecy, occasionally preying on unsuspecting visitors. Karen's discovery puts her in grave danger as the werewolves realize she knows their secret. The situation escalates when Roy falls under the particular influence of a seductive werewolf woman named Marcia Lara. Karen is isolated and fights for survival against the entire town. In a climactic confrontation, Karen faces off against the werewolves using her newfound knowledge about their weaknesses with the help of her longtime friend, Chris Hallerman. Karen struggles to overcome both the physical threat of the werewolves and the psychological trauma of her past. The Howling blends elements of psychological horror with traditional werewolf lore, creating a suspenseful tale of survival against the supernatural threat. Howling 2 invents a new word, lambombre. I don't know. Now I know why they could never adapt the second book. The first movie killed off Marcia and killed Roy much more definitively, and the fourth movie killed the Chris Hallerman analog character Tom. It's a really good setup, quick, but it's a rushed climax. Book 2 leans into the concept of Marcia as some kind of sex goddess. She directly controls Roy with sex and seduces Aubrey to manipulate her as well. The sequel takes place 3 years after the first novel. Karen is now remarried and living in Seattle with her new family, and she's still haunted by her experiences in Drago. After a series of ominous events, including the murder of her housekeeper, Karen becomes convinced that werewolves from Drago have found her. Fearing for her family's safety, she flees. Her fears are justified, as her ex-husband, Roy Beatty, and Marcia Lara, the werewolf who turned him, have indeed tracked her down. They survived the fire in Drago, but Marcia was left scarred and partially transformed by Karen's silver bullet. Karen seeks help from Chris, her former ally, who's vacationing in Mexico. Chris's new girlfriend, Audrey, jealous of their past together, attempts to sabotage their reunion. Roy and Marcia follow Karen down to Mexico, setting a trap at a gypsy witch's hut with Audrey's unwitting assistance. As Chris battles Roy in wolf form, Roy unexpectedly shows remorse and allows Chris to stab him with a silver knife. Meanwhile, Marcia holds Karen captive, intending to torture her. However, as the full moon rises, Marcia's painful transformation into a half-wolf creature begins. She drops her torture implements, inadvertently starting a fire that allows Karen to escape. The story culminates with Karen reuniting with Chris outside the hut as Marcia perishes in the flames. Howling 3 Echoes introduces new characters and goes back to Drago, kind of. Even the books can't keep the setting consistent across all 3 novels. This book adds a new alpha to the Drago pack, subtly changes the events of the burning of Drago from the very first novel, and shifts the time frame of the earlier events by about a decade. A year after the destruction of Drago, strange events unfold in a nearby town of Pinion. A teenage boy, Malcolm, is found living in the woods. He's a juvenile werewolf from Drago who is unaware of his heritage. Derek, the former leader of Drago and Malcolm's father, has been searching for him. Malcolm is placed under the care of Dr. Holly Lang, a psychiatrist who befriends him. However, Dr. Wayne Pastory, suspecting that Malcolm is a lycanthrope, abducts and experiments on him. Holly attempts a rescue, but is assaulted by Pastory's henchmen. Derek, in werewolf form, kills the henchman. Holly frees Malcolm, and she's rescued by Sheriff Gavin Ramsey. Malcolm escapes before anyone can capture him. Over the next year, Malcolm struggles to control his transformations while drifting through California. He joins a carnival freak show run by Bateman Styles, performing as Grollo, the animal boy. The show's minor success leads to Malcolm's picture being published, catching Holly's attention. She offers to bring him back to Pinion, which he accepts. The publicity also attracts Pastory, who was dismissed from Pinion Hospital following the human experimentation. He attempts to buy Malcolm from Styles, who refuses. Pastory strangles Styles, causing a fatal heart attack. Malcolm partially transforms and kills Pastory. Derek tracks Malcolm down and kidnaps Holly to persuade him to join their people. Ramsey, investigating Holly's disappearance, is led to the hideout by Lupe, a female Drago survivor. Lupe begins to transform during the journey, forcing Ramsey to shoot her with a silver bullet. Malcolm arrives at the lair, where Derek reveals that he is Malcolm's father. They both transform into werewolves and end up killing each other in a big fight. Ramsey rescues Holly, while the remaining members of Derek's group disperse into the forest, having lost their leader. Man, I really want a film adaptation of the third book. A few things would need to be changed to accommodate a normal film's running time and to cut down on the age range that the actor portraying Malcolm would need to be able to pass for. But this book has a bigger, more active cast, human heroes and villains, lycanthropic heroes and villains, and morally gray characters. Brandner is great at setting in the stage and creating an interesting character. He struggles a bit with endings. All three of his Howling novels build to a climax and then end quickly. In one case, anticlimactically. The only theme that strings across all three books is the idea of a sexually charged female who uses supernatural wiles to control or attempt to control men and occasionally other women. Marcia controls Roy in the first and second books and also controls Audrey in the second book. Lupe tries to control Gavin in the third book, all using sex as a lure, promise, and reward. In my opinion, it also gets less necessary as the series goes on. I get why it's a plot point in the first book, and I've talked about why when I discussed the original film adaptation. That same reasoning applies to Marcia's continuing control of Roy in the second book, but Marcia doesn't need sex magic to influence Audrey. She already hates Karen and would willingly help Marcia get rid of Karen so she could keep Chris for herself. I mean, I don't think Audrey would knowingly assist in helping Marcia murder Karen, which is what Marcia has planned, but Marcia can just frame it as driving Karen away, and Audrey would jump at the chance. Finally, the scene in the third book is odd. First, Lupe doesn't succeed. Gavin is a better man than Roy was. But more importantly, it's not like she even delays Gavin for any serious amount of time. That's the scene that feels the most like this is just a Brandner thing that he just keeps inserting into novels. So, if you like lycanthropes, like, share, and subscribe. Keep your eye on the moon and a silver bullet in the chamber, and we'll see you back here next episode.